Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Paul, and in this Gaming Telecom video we're going to be discussing and analysing tech news which, as usual, popped up over the past 24 or so hours. We're going to start things out with a few pieces of news concerning Nvidia, and the first one coming to us via Lenovo. The company did an oopsie. So the 1150 and the 1160 series of cards has been rumoured for several weeks now. In fact, the rumours of an 11 series, or a series of cards which do not feature RTX technology, predates even the launch of the RTX 20 series of cards. In a nutshell, these cards are supposedly based upon the Turing architecture. We've seen one leak which classifies the cards as having Turing shaders, but with ray tracing cores disabled or just not there at all. And when it comes to the tensor cores, it's unclear one way or another. But laptop manufacturer Lenovo has done an oopsie by actually confirming the GTX 11 cards within their laptops. The Legion Y530/Y7000P lists the next generation GPUs with a GeForce GTX 1160. And it appears that there are a couple of different models of this card, because one is listed as a 3GB and one is listed as a 6GB card. Now, this goes along with other rumours that we're going to see these cards launch at CES 2019. Along with the RTX 2060. We're going to talk about the RTX 2060 in just a moment. Oh, and this is also an article. You can find it linked, of course, in the description of this very video if you prefer the written format. Now, when it comes to the GTX 11 series, there are a couple of theories floating around the internet. The first theory is that it is just a rebadge of Pascal, but that's very unlikely. After all, one manufacturer did say that it's based upon the Turing shaders. It's possible that they made a mistake, but I highly doubt it. Another possibility is that Lenovo made a marketing blunder here, and they actually meant to say the RTX 2060, but I highly doubt that that's the case, because we've heard so many rumours outside of Lenovo that the 11 series of cards actually is real. Although it is interesting because Lenovo have actually outed the GTX 11 series of cards prior to this. I believe it was around the midpoint of 2018. They put out a product description page of upcoming laptops, and yes, the GTX 11 series of cards were present there. So it's possible that this series of laptops, at the very least, Lenovo simply forgot to change the wording. They made a typo. But I once again doubt that that's the case. I personally believe that Nvidia will release a series of cards which specifically have ray tracing disabled, because obviously it makes it cheaper. And I believe that they will launch alongside the RTX 2060. After all, there are so many rumours at this point, it would be incredibly unlikely that the 1150 and 1160 don't exist. The final theory that I've heard, and once again I don't believe that this is the case, is that the 11 series of GPUs is specifically designed around OEMs. What I mean by that is that companies such as Dell, such as Lenovo and so on, can use lower cost GPUs to basically sell pre-built systems, because obviously when it comes to the pre-built market, first of all, you have really slim margins, and second of all, you have to then market towards the mainstream audience quite often. I mean, sure, there is certainly the pre-build companies who focus on selling you like the 9900K with, like, you know, 2 RTX 2080 Ti's or something, but most builds are nowhere near that extravagant, and most people would go to something like Best Buy, or they would order something off of like Dell.com or what have you, and of course they would fall within a specific budget. So to be able to sell a card which obviously is cost reduced would certainly help them shift a few more units. But while I wouldn't discount the fact that releasing these cards is going to help Nvidia's graces with OEMs, I don't think that this is going to be one of those cases where Nvidia are just releasing a product line specifically for OEMs, because just a quick reminder, you know, the 1080p market is by far the biggest, you know, audience for gamers. Now we have an update for the RTX 2060 series of cards. Supposedly the GPU is going to launch on January the 7th, and then will start to appear in retail about a week later, so it will be purchasable by January the 15th. And the website videocards.com have actually managed to grab a couple of images of the Founders Edition variant of this GPU. We'll go into the specs in just a moment, but it's pretty clear that the design is almost identical to the RTX 2070. So we have dual fans, and perhaps most interestingly of all, there's a couple of connections which you might want to take note of. The first is that we see a single 8-pin power connector here. That obviously means that NVIDIA want to keep the clock speeds as high as possible, and they don't feel that a 6-pin plus PCIe is going to deliver enough power to the GPU. The second factor is that it does actually have a DVI-I connector. So obviously with the 2070 and above, most folks are possibly going to want to pair this with a newer monitor. And so loading up the GPU with things such as display ports and HDMI makes more sense. But for a lower end SKU, adding a DVI connection is probably the better way to go, because there's a greater likelihood that the monitor that you're going to be pairing that with is going to just have a single DVI connection. So that's quite a smart move from NVIDIA, and does more closely mirror to what AMD do in a lot of their different SKUs. In terms of the specs then, 1920 CUDA cores, 30 RT cores, Tensor cores are supposedly at 240. The clock speed is boosting up to 1680 megahertz, so it's roughly within the same margins as the 2070 in terms of clock speed. 192-bit bus is what is being leaked around the internet, so with 6 gigabytes of memory, which obviously makes sense given it's 6 gigabytes of memory, and that's with GDDR6 memory. And finally, the clock speed is the same as all of the other RTX series of cards, so we're looking at 14 Gbps. Compare that to the closest other card in the Turing lineup, the 2070, which has 2304 CUDA cores. There is obviously quite a cut there. Memory bandwidth has also taken a hit because of 256-bit bus versus 192, and obviously you've got 2 gigabytes of memory less as well. In terms of performance then, my prediction is it's going to be around the performance of a 1070 Ti. The reason I make that prediction is despite the fact that the number of CUDA cores is essentially identical to that of the 1070, but there are a couple of architectural changes with Turing which do help nudge up performance. Obviously memory bandwidth could be an issue, but Turing does have better color compression and other bits and pieces, so my prediction is around the same level of performance as the 1070 Ti, but obviously that's probably going to depend as well upon the model of card you're comparing it to. If you go with like a heavily overclocked 1070 Ti or a heavily overclocked 1070, then obviously that's going to certainly push it possibly above what we're seeing here. But the most crucial factor for this card, just like any, is going to be the pricing. There has been no official pricing at the moment that has leaked. My guess is around the $350 mark, possibly a little more, possibly a little less. I suspect it's going to be 350 at max. And while we're on the subject of graphics cards, a very small update concerning AMD's Navi line of cards, and this update comes to us through the website PC Games N, and I'll link of course their article in the description of this video. What they believe, according to multiple AIBs that they have spoken to, is that the Navi architecture is essentially going to be a replacement for what we have with Polaris. So with the wording that we're seeing here, it's almost certain with Polaris being steadily replaced by Navi, and eventually of course Polaris just disappearing off of store shelves. Performance still hasn't been 100% confirmed yet. We have multiple reports from AMD that it's going to be in the mid-range, possibly up to the higher end series of cards. We also had an exclusive just recently concerning the Vega 7nm. From what I'm hearing from a couple of sources, the cards are going to be known as Radeon 7, likely a play of course on the 7nm process, but they're going to be available in limited quantities at some point early next year, and the performance of that is going to be pretty impressive. It's going to be slightly higher than the GTX 1080 Ti, possibly a little faster. I'm going to link the article and video in the description of this one if you want to go ahead and check that out. I suspect 2019 is going to be a very interesting year for graphics cards, because it's possible that 2019 could also see the shrinkage of the very cheap line of cards from various companies, like the RX 560 type of GPUs, could very much take a hit in terms of sales numbers. The reason behind this is not only will higher end APUs come out from AMD, which of course will be based upon the 7nm process, but as Intel get closer and closer and closer to launching its Ice Lake series of CPUs, and then they will obviously have considerably more powerful integrated graphics, it is possible that it will really squeeze the lower end market for graphics cards. And then of course in 2020 Intel themselves get into the discrete GPU market, and I suspect there's going to be a major shake-up from all of the different companies involved in that. And now I'm going to finish the video off with some comments from Tim Sweeney over at Epic Games, specifically revolving around their store. So Steam have definitely had the monopoly in digital sales for PC for some time now. And Valve actually made a couple of very smart moves. For one, requiring the installation of Steam if you were to, say, buy Half-Life 2 back in the day. Them doing that really set themselves up for monopoly in the industry, because they knew that Half-Life 2 was, well, kind of wanted by PC gamers, so it basically let them in through the back door, and people think, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to do that. And Counter-Strike being incredibly popular around that time as well meant that when Valve made the decision to be like, well, if you want to play the latest version of Counter-Strike, you're going to need to install Steam. So by them doing that, despite the fact that originally the Steam store was kind of anemic with titles on it, it meant that eventually developers were like, well, if we want to sell our games digitally, I guess we're going to give Valve a cut of our profits, and well, we know what the story is now. Users on Reddit have called Epic Games' decisions with the Epic Store anti-consumer. And Tim Sweeney has said the following: "It's up to you guys to decide what's anti-consumer, but our aim with Epic Games Store is to be very pro-competitive. In other words, to compete as a store and encourage healthy competition between stores. When lots of stores compete, the result is a combination of better prices for you, better deals for developers, and more investment in new content and innovation. These exclusives don't come to stores for free. They're a result of a combination of marketing commitments, developing funding, and revenue guarantees. This is all helping developers. Multiple stores are necessary for the health of an ecosystem. When there's only one, the natural tendency is to siphon off more and more of the revenue, which then goes to a monopoly of profits rather than creators." Obviously, that's somewhat of a dig at Steam. "All developers recognize this because their business are being crushed under the weight of these increases store taxes. This is why devs have been super enthusiastic about Epic Store. For users, I get that you have yet another launcher, and if you have Steam installed, you prefer just to use it. But if you are wanting better games to be built around the future, then please recognize that good this store can do. Steam takes 30% and Epic takes just 12%. That's an 18% difference, and most devs make way less than an 18% profit margin. So this could be the difference between being able to fund a new game and going bankrupt. I will be interested to see how Epic managed to push the store and what exclusives that they can secure. It would be very interesting to me if PC exclusives which were using the Epic Store were less likely to be monetized by microtransactions and other such practices, which I often consider predatory. Sure, microtransactions don't necessarily equal bad. Some microtransactions can be okay, and DLC can also be pretty good in some instances as well, like for example the DLC behind Witcher. In fact, I would even hesitate to call it DLC, it's a full expansion for goodness sake. But often, of course, you get nickeled and dimed, and as someone who has recently had a spate of interest in Street Fighter V and then just kind of lost interest after just a few days of playing it because I just don't like the grind and the way that Capcom have recently monetized Season 4 with the inability to purchase a Season Pass and just what I consider rather expensive costs for what content you're getting. I definitely would like developers to get a larger cut here with digital storefronts, and possibly for microtransactions to possibly go away, but I don't think that's going to be the case, unfortunately. With all that said, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. Normal stuff, like, share, comment and subscribe. And you can also find us on Patreon, which of course is linked in the video description. There are also Amazon affiliate links, which you can use if you so desire. If you want to buy yourself like a new coffee pot or something like that, we would appreciate any help there. And with all that said, take